How and to what extent has there been a meaningful shift in this conflict over the last few days? Just draw a line under what we've seen in the last 48 hours.
Yeah, Tom, so listen, we'll begin with sort of the deployment of the North Korean troops, which of course was a little while earlier, but this is really the justification that was needed by the Biden administration, and now it seems increasingly other parts of the Western powers to say that yes, Ukraine can use some of these long-range missiles within Russian territory, which had been seen as a sort of no-go zone for a long period of time. Obviously, first it was the U.S. that capitulated on that, Joe Biden, and then generally speaking, this has been the pattern. The U.S. does something, then the European allies are willing to sort of move and support it. The question is, Tom, I think, is this an escalation or is this sort of a path towards negotiation, right? And the same week, you also have Putin sort of lowering the bar for what would require basically a nuclear response, his new nuclear doctrine. Again, that also sort of feels escalatory. That being said, Tom, a negotiation, as we know, does not really begin until two sides name a price. The Ukrainians have named their price very early. It is a return of all their territory, including Crimea, as well as sort of paying for the damages done by the war. Russia may have named their price earlier this week. In some of the reporting that we've seen out of Reuters, basically saying that there is some an openness from Vladimir Putin to talk to Donald Trump about potentially carving out specific regions, potentially returning a very, very small amount of territory, and also part of the sort of conditions would be a blocking of Ukraine ever joining NATO. These are, of course, non-starters from the Ukrainian position. The Ukrainians will say this is too high a price to pay in these negotiations. The Europeans will say the same thing. The question is, Tom, what will Donald Trump say? He will be absolutely instrumental into shaping however this sort of conflict goes, either escalates or ends, and that is going to be the real question here. And I think that there's a real consciousness from both sides, from the European allies as well as Ukraine and Russia. They want to be in the strongest position possible when this wild card of Donald Trump comes in and really maybe sort of creates a new paradigm for this war.
Yeah, and the history of Donald Trump, his verbiage, what he said, of course, his actions as well, suggest that he doesn't sit in the middle between Zelensky and Putin, and that he's leaning slightly more to the Moscow position, would be the argument for some, of course, looking at what he said in the past. Talk to us about what the Biden administration has been and can do in this short window of time it has before the Trump administration takes in to support Ukraine.
Yeah, so they're the immediate things that will have immediate sort of effects on the battlefield, like the delivery of these sort of long-range and the permissions of these long-range missiles. We also had these landmines that were going to be delivered for the first time. We should say these are landmines that become inert after a period of time rather than sort of staying around forever. But there are also some long-term proposals that the Biden administration has been looking at, including potentially forgiving some of Ukraine's debt. And we understand forgiving about $4.6 billion worth of it. Now, we should say that this is debt that is part of that earlier package that was passed over in April of $60 billion. And as part of a sort of agreement on that, the sort of Democrats wanted to push this through as a fully sort of as a gift to Ukraine. Donald Trump from the campaign trail said, why don't we do this as a loan? And in order to get it through the sort of the politics and the Republicans, they had to attach $9 billion worth of debt. Now the Biden administration basically wants to move to cancel about half of that debt. That is obviously going to face a great deal of resistance from a number of people, particularly the Republicans. Rand Paul, this senator from Kentucky, already saying that he needs to block basically Biden from making Ukraine's debt America's problem. They don't necessarily have the votes right now, but of course, given the political climate in the United States and what we saw out of the election, this may be a sort of hard thing to push through.